Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all. Welcome to the Alice Mackay Room. My name is Jorge Amigo, and I'm the head of cultural programming here at VPL. Thank you for joining us on this lovely Tuesday evening. It's great to see so many of you here for the very first Incite of 2026. Let's give a round of applause for that. Who was at the George Saunders event with the Writers' Fest? A couple of you. Okay, great. Okay, we're very grateful to the Vancouver Writers' Fest for this partnership, which brings some of the most exciting writers to our stage here at the VPL. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we're hosting this event from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And the library has a very strong commitment to reconciliation, which you can see reflected in our collections, in our programming, but also in our public art. And so speaking of public art, I don't know if you know, but we just updated our amazing photography collection or exhibition upstairs, which is curated by the Canada Council for the Arts. If you haven't seen it, go to the 8th or 9th floors after this event or tomorrow or any other day. It's beautiful. It takes up 2 floors, and there's a lot of amazing photographers, including some incredible Indigenous work. So quick show of hands, who is here for the very first Incite? Or their very first Incite? Okay, cool. And who has never been to a VPL event before? Okay, a few of you. Well, welcome. So if you're new to this space, if you've never been here, my team hosts about 120 events per year in different spaces throughout the library. So we do author talks, film screenings, live music concerts, dance performances, and a lot of creative writing classes. So like tomorrow, for instance, we're hosting Canadian Olympian Valerie Jerome, who's talking about her book Races, that explores how she and her brother, Harry Jerome, overcame anti-Black racism to become Olympians. So that's just a sample of what we have in store for the season. We have a bunch of brochures over there if you want to see what we're up to. Please come back. So before I pass it on to Leslie, a few housekeeping notes for you. So the exit, you can come in and out as many times as you want. That's totally fine. This is not the Queen Elizabeth Theatre. We're not holding you hostage. But one favor is please use the back door over there. That's way less disruptive to folks on stage. So use that one in the back. You can come in and out as many times as you want. And then please make sure your cell phones are silent so that they're not making noise for your fellow attendees, but also for people on stage. You're welcome to keep your phone on and take the occasional picture or a short video and tell people you're at a very cool library and Writers' Fest event. If you do that, and if you do post it on social media, make sure to tag us because we might repost it. We love that. So now, it is my pleasure to pass the torch to Leslie Herdig, who is the Artistic Director of the Vancouver Writers' Fest.
Thank you, Jorge. Hi, everybody. Welcome, and welcome to everyone watching from home, too. It is indeed our first Incite event of 2026, and I just want to pay particular attention this evening to the person that started the Incite series back in 2012. That was started by one of our artistic directors, Hal Wake, who just passed away in the past couple of months. And Hal's dream was to make the Vancouver Writers' Fest, which for many, many years had been a week-long festival on Granville Island, into something that provided programming to Vancouverites year-round. And he did that by partnering with the wonderful Vancouver Public Library and creating this free programming series. So just in memory of Hal, we acknowledge how lucky we are to be in this partnership with the VPL, and how grateful we are that this series is thriving, alive and thriving. So tonight we are honored to welcome Maggie Helwig, who is the winner of the 2025 Toronto Book Award for her startling book, Encampment, Resistance, Grace, and an Unhoused Community. And we are grateful as ever to the Vancouver Public Library, as I said, for their collaboration in this space in which we gather, and to all of our government funders, especially our title sponsor, CMHC Granville Island, who gives us a home on Granville Island. And thank you to the wonderful small independent press, Coach House Press, for the opportunity to host Maggie here and for making her travel to Vancouver possible. And to our independent bookseller Upstart and Crow, who is selling copies of Maggie's book. For those of you who are new to Incite and to the Vancouver Writers Fest, this series runs quarterly throughout the year. This is indeed our first event of the season, but our programming is just getting going, and we hope you will join us for our Books and Ideas series on Granville Island that runs just about every other week between now and June. For instance, you could join us on February 25th when we will be hosting UBC psychologist Joanna Cheek in conversation with Gabor Mate to talk about her incredible new book. You could join us, well, I'd say you could join us for Michael Ondaatje on March 12th, but I think it just sold out today, which is too bad. But we have many wonderful events happening, so please do consider signing up for our newsletter or checking our website for that. Just a note about the shape of our event here tonight, Maggie is joined by acclaimed Tyee senior editor and journalist Jackie Wong, and they will talk over the next hour about many things before turning it over to you, our viewers at home, and our audience for some questions of your own. For those of you who are here, if you have a smartphone, you can scan this QR code and enter questions that occur to you as we are underway. If you don't have access to a smartphone, or if you just want good old-fashioned contact with the author, you can raise your hand, and Jackie will get to as many questions as possible. For those of you at home, just enter your question, and again, Jackie will see those as they come, and we'll probably just have time for 3 or 4 questions, but she will find the good ones for sure. Following the event, Maggie will be available to sign copies of her book just over here, and we encourage you to visit Upstart and Crow. For those of you watching from home, they will have some signed copies in the store that you can pick up after this. As I mentioned, Jackie Wong is a senior editor at the Tyee, an online news publication for BC. She edits The Weekender, the Tyee's weekend culture magazine, and it's published widely. And in a life before the Tyee, she worked as a writing workshop facilitator in the downtown East Side and as an editor at Megaphone, a social enterprise creating meaningful work for those who are experiencing poverty. Maggie Helwig is a longtime Toronto social justice activist and also an Anglican priest and a writer, and she's been the rector at the Church of St. Stephen in the Fields since 2013. She's the author of 15 books and chapbooks, including Girls Fall Down, which is also a Coach House title. It was shortlisted for the Toronto Book Award and was chosen as a One Book Toronto book in 2012. And most recently, of course, she has written Encampment. To list all of its accolades would keep us here for a very long time. But let me just say, apart from winning the City of Toronto Book Award, it received starred reviews in Publishers Weekly and was listed as a Globe and Mail Best Book of 2025. And this from the jury citation for the City of Toronto Book Award. They said, "Encampment is the book for anyone who has ever looked at an unhoused settlement and wondered, how does this happen in a country as wealthy as Canada, in a city as vibrant and seemingly compassionate as Toronto?" I know you will all agree that this book could have just as easily been written about Vancouver. This vital question is posed to all who live here. Please welcome Maggie Helwig and Jackie Wong.
Thank you very much, Leslie, for that lovely introduction, and thank you to Jorge. Wonderful to see everybody here today, and hello to everybody online joining us. Really honored to be here at the first Incite event with Maggie. To start things off, I'm going to invite Maggie to read briefly from the book. This is a beautiful piece of writing that I'm just really excited to hear you read from. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to read the first few pages of the book. I found that works fairly well as a reading, and it was written to introduce you to the book, so here it is. One day, as I was starting to write this book, I was leaving the church where I work when an angry woman stopped me after throwing a bag of garbage into the encampment in our yard, and told me that a person had started sleeping in her yard and that I needed to tell her how she could find out who it was and make him go away. I suggested that she ask the person himself who he was. She stared at me as if I had suggested that she fly to the moon for information, and exclaimed, "But he takes drugs." "You can still ask him who he is," I said. And she stormed away up the street. I tell this story not primarily to illustrate how I have come to be seen as responsible for all homeless people within about an 8-block radius of the church, although that is, for some reason, true. I tell it because there is a great gulf fixed, and very few people are willing to cross it. People who have not lived in the world of which encampments are part are afraid, and they are angry. And they cannot imagine that there is a way to cross that line, to speak to a homeless person as a fellow human being, without somehow themselves being harmed, being damaged, being touched by a world they would rather deny. I am writing this because I want you to understand my world, the world I live in and the world I live alongside. I have been an Anglican priest since 2012. I have been the priest at St. Stephen in the Fields in Kensington Market in Toronto since 2013. We have had, I guess somewhat famously, and somewhat more famously now, an encampment in our churchyard since about the spring of 2022, although there was no single clear point when it began, and it is tied up with events and choices going back for years, and is perhaps ultimately the responsibility of the poet and theologian Rowan Williams, who was once the Archbishop of Canterbury. I sent Rowan Williams a copy of the book, actually. I haven't heard back from him. I am writing this because I want you to understand that this is a world of real people who struggle and are kind, who are often special and beautiful in ways that most of our society cannot and does not try to understand. I want you to understand that I have felt safer here than in most other places, hard as it has sometimes been. It is a different world, and why I am easy with this world is hard to pin down. Because it is honest, and most people are not honest. Because I have waged my own lifelong battles with depression, anxiety, OCD, probably undiagnosed autism, and because I was viciously bullied through my whole school career and took on board the clear message that the normal world didn't want me, and I decided fairly early on that I didn't want them either. Because my parents taught drama and creative writing in the prisons, and there were social dynamics I met as a child that most middle-class people learn in training workshops as adults, if they learn them at all. Because at one point in my 20s, I looked at a man panhandling at Bloor and Bathurst and thought that I needed to take completely seriously the proposition that he was Jesus. Because my autistic daughter has spent most of her 28 years being expelled from program after program. Because I don't dress very well and my hair isn't very good, and I look more like I belong in the world of the encampment than in the world of the others. Because people on the street, exhausting as they can often be, have also been kind to me and to my daughter more consistently than almost anyone else. And I am writing this because I do not have much optimism about what is coming in our society, in our world. We are standing at the edge of catastrophic climate breakdown and the fall of a long empire, and all the collateral damage which the fall of an empire brings. Nothing stable is going to last. And the only way that we, the small and the ordinary, might survive in any decent way is if we learn to take care of each other, to do it deeply and consistently and in ways that will change how we think and how we live. This is one story, flawed and incomplete, of people who have been trying to look after each other in very hard times, and some of the ways in which we have been changed. And I am writing this because if you want to know who someone is, you can ask them.
Thank you, Maggie. So powerful. This part of our talk is going to go until about 8 o'clock, and because this is the Writers' Festival, I'm first going to ask you a few writer questions about process and the work that you've done on the book, and then we'll get into some of these questions that have been raised in this excerpt that you just read. I wanted to start with talking a little bit about the Maggie that we get to know in the book. We see you biking across the city, you're visiting people in hospital, you're giving a service at the church, you're such a powerful doer in your life, and I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about the process that you have for setting aside time for the very diametrically opposed, solitary, quiet work of writing.
Well, I didn't publish a book between 2008 and 2025, so that tells you something. Now, I was still writing during that period because I was writing sermons. Because once a week I have to get up and talk. And I do treat that very seriously as writing, as a form of literary production. But the sustained concentration that it takes to write a book is very, very hard when you are working as a parish priest. It's a life that takes a lot of engagement and a lot of doing. And I am a fairly compulsively doing sort of person. Ironically, it was probably only because my husband became so ill and I was forced to spend time at home, a great deal of time at home, whether I really wanted to or not. I had to slow down. And the work of caregiving is still extremely exhausting and absorbing work, but somehow in the spaces between that, there was a little bit more reflective time, at least for a while. As his illness proceeded, that became less. So ironically, the book probably came about partly because of that. This was also a very easy book to write. I mean, I'd been writing journals, I'd been writing emails. The book details a lot of conflict with the city, and it became clear to me pretty early in the course of that conflict that I needed to document everything that happened. So I was writing everything down. And I was also keeping a journal, and I was writing letters to friends. And so when I sat down to write the book, a lot of the material already existed. And there was also just this powerful need to get it all organized and out, and a lot of that was rage. A lot of that was just this outpouring of rage against the bureaucracies and the obstacles and the everything going on. So I am now trying to write a novel. So I am trying to get back into that space of having that actual writing time. It's difficult. It's difficult to put together with with work, but it's also who I am, so it's what I'm trying to do.
I love that reflection about the constant challenge of how do we possibly contain the many versions of ourselves in one day or one life. Today you flew here from the ice storm, the ice land of Toronto with your daughter, and you're part of a larger spate of traveling for your book at the moment. And I've been told that traveling, doing events in support of a book can be a little bit surreal, and maybe it takes the quality of time travel in some ways, because you're being asked again and again by people like me to talk about this very specific period of time that is now in the past. And I wonder if you can maybe talk a little bit about some of the recent moments that you might have wished could be included in the book, or reflections that you're thinking about when you're considering this kind of odd space of time travel.
I wouldn't say it's something that I would like to have included in the book, because it's something that I didn't want to happen. But when the book ends, the encampment has been partially cleared, but there are still a few people living in the yard. After that, the encampment actually regrew fairly significantly and became fairly large again. In October 2025, it was finally and completely eradicated by the City of Toronto on October 16th, the day after I was given the Toronto Book Award. The city came in. The entire churchyard is now surrounded by 8-foot security fences and covered with gigantic concrete blocks to prevent anyone from trying to seek shelter there ever again. And from October 16th to early January, there was a Garda World security car parked across the street 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They have now relocated that car to the park down the street, but certainly if there was any sign of anybody attempting to set up in the churchyard again, they would be back quickly. We have been informed that we are considered a zero tolerance site for the city, and that any attempt of anyone to shelter in the churchyard again will be dealt with very rapidly. So that is where we are now. So it is very bittersweet in a way. I'm glad that the book exists, because I'm glad there's a record of the community that we had. But it's really sad. It's really sad that every day, instead of walking through a group of people who had come to be my friends, I'm walking through concrete blocks and security fences to go into my church. We're still in contact with people. They still come to the church. The relationships are ongoing. Those haven't been destroyed, but the sadness of this complete and final eradication of the community in the yard is not something that's in the book, and that kind of casts a shadow back on the book in a weird way. I wrote the book, to be honest, in part because I hoped that it would protect the encampment, and it didn't. Getting the Toronto Book Award didn't protect the encampment. That's what happened. A week after it was cleared, some of my volunteers did a beautiful chalk art installation, just all over the pavements and all over every bit of that wasn't fenced, and the sort of the title of it, the sort of biggest chalk piece was "A Community Was Here" along the sidewalk. And in fact, they've now applied for a grant to do an outdoor exhibit of art by people who used to live in the encampment called "A Community Was Here." I hope they get that grant. I hope we're able to do that exhibit.
One thing that really struck me in the opening sections of the book was your articulation of this gap that you perceived between two worlds. And you called you called one world the land of the well, and you called the other world the land of affliction. And you noted that you've not been much more than a tourist in the land of the well, and the land of affliction is your home. And I was wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about that and how this has maybe informed your approaches to working with people in the encampment.
Susan Sontag was where I encountered the land of the well and the land of the sick. And she talks in Cancer as Metaphor a lot about the land of the well and the land of the sick, and how they are two different countries, two different realities. I use the land of affliction because I feel like there's a reality it's not only physical illness, but it is any kind of overt vulnerability, marginalization. Affliction is a term that I've taken from Simone Weil. She talks a lot about, well, the English translation is affliction. And I think part of it is that the reality is we all live in the land of the sick. We all live in the land of affliction. The idea of wellness, the idea that we are supposed to be in this state of okayness, of doing well, of physical thriving, it really is an illusion. There's a striving in our society for a kind of invulnerability and a kind of success and a kind of presentation of health and wellness and yes, success. And it really, really is an illusion. But some people are able to live in it as if it was real for significant periods of their life. No one can live there forever. I mean, eventually you get old, and then there you are. But it's a powerful myth, and a lot of the fear of people who are overtly disabled or people who are overtly different is because it threatens this really propped up, this really defended myth of wellness, which we are taught is what we ought to achieve.
I think that your approach to these dissonances, the bizarre constructedness of life itself, is approached to such great effect with such incredible compassion and also humor in the book. And I wonder if we can dive into some of the dissonances that you discuss, particularly as how they relate to the gap between intention and impact, the gap between charity and justice. There's a really interesting scene where you describe how there would be a woman who would just throw old clothes out of her car towards people in the encampment, or a store would pull up and bring out flats of rotting fruit and vegetables for people to eat, or a bakery would come by, and there's always so much bread. In the donation space, tons of bread, inedible bread that was attracting pigeons and rats. And I wonder, when we see these scenes, we see these scenes in Vancouver too, what would you say to somebody who is wanting to meaningfully contribute or to help?
I would say talk to the people you want to help and ask them what they need. People would come to me and say, do you think people in the encampment would like this or that? Do you think people in the encampment would want me to bring donuts? So, like, why don't you ask them if they want donuts? Just go, they're right there. Just say, would you like some donuts? But there's such a fear. There's so many stereotypes that people have been taught and so many falsehoods that people have been taught. They are so afraid just to go to people and say, what do you need? What would be good? But yeah, that's what I would say. And that's what I say under most circumstances to anybody who wants to know anything about encampments, what they can do or what the realities there are or anything. Is like, go and talk to people. Just talk to people. Just talk to them about their lives. Of course, that gets harder and harder as encampments are cleared and people are driven into more and more remote places and more out of the public sphere and sort of on the run from municipal authorities all the time. And that's not an accident either. To make it harder to talk to people and learn about the realities of their lives is probably not top of mind of the people who are clearing encampments, but still, I think on some level it's there.
I really appreciated your discussion of mental illness in the book, and particularly a very interesting and complicating discussion about the ways in which folks in social service adjacent spaces approach mental health, and particularly schizophrenia. And I was wondering if you could talk about how we might all work towards supporting folks with schizophrenia in a more meaningful way.
I tried to be very careful with my language in the book, partly because most of the people I'm writing about have made it clear to me they do not want the language of mental illness. They do not want me to talk about them in the frame of mental illness. And I think that is a very reasonable and understandable thing, if only because things are so stigmatized. As soon as you say that somebody is mentally ill, you have just written off their perceptions, you have written off their value. So I have tried to be careful, and I've tried to address it for people who maybe don't have so much familiarity in ways that I hope can explain a little bit more about the lived reality of people who have been identified as having what we call mental illness. Schizophrenia is a really complicated condition which has genetic roots and roots in adverse childhood experience and very deep cultural roots, and it's very much culturally mediated. And we live in a society in which people with what we call schizophrenia have significantly worse life outcomes than people with the same condition in many other countries. In African and Asian countries, the whole model of how you understand these conditions and how you deal with them socially is different and often leads to significantly better life outcomes. So we're not talking about a simple phenomenon. We're talking about something that has a whole complicated existence of different factors and is shaped by the culture we live in as much as it's shaped by the individual. There's no question that there are, among the people who are unhoused, there are people who are living with profound differences in consciousness. That's not the only reason people are unhoused by any means, and these two populations don't map onto each other absolutely by any means. But one of the common stereotypes and one of the things people are afraid of is these profound cognitive and consciousness differences. And I've found there is tremendous value in entering into someone else's cognitive framework, someone else's perceptual framework, which may be very different from yours, and trying to come to an understanding together. It's a very enriching experience. And it's complex, and you have to work. The person I talk about in the book as the artist, Is an extraordinary mind. But Andrew, one of our church people, Andrew was talking about how, social service listens to her, and it's like garbage, 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 something about past lives, garbage, garbage. And it's true. That's pretty much what they hear when she talks. But if you listen to her, if you can listen to her and inhabit her cognitive framework, she's really an extraordinary person who's saying a lot of really interesting and valuable things, and things which are important to understand if you want to make decisions about how you can best help her and how she can help you. So if we're not open to that kind of conversation and that kind of understanding, we're not going to understand what kind of supports people need, what kind of environments are going to help people stay in housing, what kind of environments are going to help people stay healthy. What do they know that we don't know, because they know a lot that we don't know.
There's a really beautiful expansiveness in your book. This expansiveness, where I think we were talking a little bit about this in the green room earlier, about how I think there's a great question here about how do you be a person in the world? How do you be a citizen in the world in a meaningful way? And I think part of that expansiveness is collapsing some of these preconceived ideas of that which needs to be separate in our lives. And you're very open in the book about the care work that is part of your life across your personal life, your husband, your daughter, alongside your work at the church and your work in the encampment. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit about that integration and how one experience at home informs what's happening and how you're approaching the encampment.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I'm necessarily very different from anyone else in this. I think I'm probably more willing to be public about some things. Certainly, I'm not different from most women or most people who are, living in the world as women. Care work is going to be a massive part of what you're doing. It just is. And it was important to me to include that, partly because I didn't want this to be a book about, the nice church lady helping those poor, unfortunate people. It had to be a book about me as a screwed up person trying to build community with a bunch of other screwed up people, some of whom are homeless, and others not. So it was important to be open about the complications in my own life. But as I said, I don't think I'm actually that very different from a lot of other people. I'm just being more upfront about it.
I think that honesty is very welcome, and part of why I think this book has been so widely acclaimed too.
Yeah, well, it's an autistic thing. I'm actually literally incapable of lying. So.
I really loved one of these lines from one of the final chapters of your book. You wrote, "Power and greed and fear will try to stop you. Time and grief will wear you down. But life stands with you, speaks your name in the morning." I wonder if you can talk a little bit about this phrase. And this phrase happens at a point in the book when there are ongoing tragedies, and yet there's still sunrise.
Yeah, that was a sermon for Easter, and when you are preaching, sometimes you have to say things even if you don't feel them in your own life. Part of being a priest, part of being a preacher, is the creation of hope and of reasons to keep going. And sometimes, even if you don't really feel it yourself, you go into the resources of a tradition, and you go into the resources of a community, and you go into the resources of all the people around the world who are still building and still creating and still resisting. And you think resurrection has some meaning. Resurrection is still something, and it is in the ongoing work and the ongoing ability of people to reach out and love each other in very terrible circumstances. And that does seem to be something that human beings still can do. That even in situations of collapse, even in situations of affliction, people do reach out for each other and love each other and support each other. And there is something in that persists and speaks to a reality of the potential in human beings. And I think I, like an awful lot of people, have been very inspired by seeing the people in Minneapolis who are extraordinary. It's extraordinary what's happening there. I don't know how long they can keep this up, but that this community has persisted in being neighbors and loving each other says something about what human beings under the right circumstances are capable of.
We were speaking a little bit about Minneapolis back before we came up here, and about neighborliness particularly. And there are so many scenes in the book where you're walking into the churchyard and you have cake and people are having coffee and cookies together, and lots of really vivid illustrations of shared meals. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about this piece about gathering, about neighborliness. There's something in the book which I think is a real masterclass in thinking about how do we be a neighbor and a citizen in a way that we're also seeing in a big way in Minneapolis right now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is the traditional practices of the church or of any faith institution. I sometimes tell young activists, you know what, connect yourself with with some kind of faith community. It doesn't maybe necessarily matter which one, as long as it's not some kind of crazy right-wing Christianity. But you know, this is where people have daily practices of community building. And there are other places in our society where those daily practices of community building exist, but there aren't a whole lot. We need more. We need being community to be a whole set of regular daily practices that we are all doing, because we need that. We are going to need that to survive. Because when something happens, when, you know, 3,000 ICE agents move into your city, or there's a flood, or there's a fire, or there's all of these things that are going to keep happening and happening more and more and more, you need to know your neighbors, and you need to know what your own skills are and what your own limits are, and you need to know how to feed people, and you need to know how to organize. I mentioned this at another reading I did last week. A friend of mine who's very involved in anti-fascist work, and she kind of has a reputation as, you know, like she's the person you go to for the anti-fascist stuff. People will come to her and say, you know, well, how do I get involved in anti-fascist activism? And she'll say, find a community meal and volunteer. That's the ground from which all other organizing comes. Get together with a bunch of other people and feed people.
It's an important place to start. in BC and also in Vancouver this fall, particularly in Vancouver, there's going to be a very spicy municipal election. And some of the questions that people are having about it have to do with poverty and with unhoused folks and what role a city can play in these issues. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit about what you would advise voters locally to think about as they navigate this space.
I honestly don't know, because I am so done with the City of Toronto that I don't know what to tell anybody else about their municipal government. I really tried to work with the City of Toronto. We tried, and this book is a record of having tried for years to try to find some ways that we could collaborate or talk to each other or something. And I am so fed up. And municipal governments are a small level, which on the one hand makes them more accessible, on the other hand means they don't have a lot of power. They are being blown around by the winds on the larger levels, provincial, federal, international. But I think what we need to see is honesty. And I think that, for me, is where the City of Toronto has completely fallen down, is that they simply will not be honest about the fact that we are in a crisis. And it is a huge crisis, and it's not going to be fixed by tweaking around the edges of the system. And even when they do good things, and they've created some housing and they've done some good things, it's with this sort of smiley sort of, now everything's fixed, it's good, everything's great. Because politicians apparently have to do this or nobody will vote for them. I don't know, look for somebody who's honest. Look for somebody who will actually say, we're in some very deep holes here. We're in some very deep holes, and we can pull out of them together, but it's not going to be overnight, and it's going to require everybody pulling together. I don't know if you have any candidates who are willing to say things like that.
This is the last question I'm going to ask you before we go to a couple from the audience. Speaking of, you were mentioning earlier how it's very hard for you to lie. And I actually found it very soothing to read your words about how you felt like we were on the verge of total crisis. I was wondering if you could tell me just a little bit about what you do when things get really challenging.
What do I do?
Like, how do you, do you have a practice for grounding yourself when things are very hard? I feel like there's oftentimes a real crisis mode that you're working in sometimes.
I don't know. I cry and I ride my bike.
Crying and riding the bike at the same time is a good idea.
I don't know. I feel like I burned out long ago, and now I'm in this weird post-burnout state where I can't burn out because there's nothing left to burn. But I mean, in a broader sense, yeah, I am part of a community. And I think that's what sustains me, is I'm part of a small, weird, but very real community. I've occasionally said, if everything completely falls apart, I'm probably going to be okay because Pirate's going to look after me. Which he will, Pirate's got my back. But I also discovered some of the younger volunteers at the church have a WhatsApp group that they call the St. Stephen's Syndicate, and they're always chatting away on the WhatsApp group. And I discovered that the apocalypse plan, like the plan for flood or fire or pestilence or 3,000 ice agents or everything falling apart, the plan is everybody get to the church and we'll figure it out from there. And that's really reassuring to know. You know, we have a place we can go, and we have a community that can gather together and say, okay, everything's gone to shit, but what are we collectively going to do? Not what is each one of us going to do alone.
We can all cry and ride our bikes there at the same time. We have a couple of questions from folks online that I'm going to turn to first before turning to the audience. One person is asking a little bit about your process and your journey of being an artist and a person in ministry. They're asking, you came from an artistic family and you were a creative fiction writer first. At what point did you feel called to go into the ministry and social justice?
I mean, the ministry and social justice ought to be the same thing, but they're not. So that is two separate things, I guess. I mean, I've done social justice work for most of my life alongside being a writer, and I don't think there's ever been any. It's just stuff I do. The process of becoming an Anglican priest was a long one. I was not brought up in any particular religious tradition. I decided to be baptized in the Anglican Church when I was 19. And I would say I felt the pull towards ordained ministry almost immediately. But I also knew that I wouldn't be very good at it. That at that point in my life, I didn't have the right skills, I didn't have the right temperament. I used to sit in the pews and watch the priests up at the altar and think, I should be up there doing that, and I just assumed that everybody sitting in the pews actually was thinking that. And it took me a really long time to realize that, no, actually, that is not the case. But it was always there, but it was backburnered for a long time because it didn't feel like it didn't feel like it was the right time, that I was the right person, or that there was a space for me in the church. And I think I changed a lot over a bunch of years, and also the church changed a lot over a bunch of years. And I started thinking about it again, and finally was urged by people in the church that I was attending at that time to actually start theological school and really seriously explore this. And so that's how I ended up where I am. But it's something that's been there for a long time. And can I explain why? No, I can't explain why. It's one of those things that you really can't explain. You just feel like this is a thing I need to do.
Thank you. I have two more online questions, and then I'm going to go to the audience. This is a request for a spoiler from the book. This person is asking, how did the city of Toronto justify taking down the encampment when it was on church property? And what did the legal battle look like with the city? And I know you can be brief with this. I know this is a long process.
The final stage, it was fire. Fire was what they finally brought against us. And the office of the fire marshal is not constrained by private property. The office of the fire marshal can bring orders against private property as well as against city property. What level of collaboration was there between the city and the office of the fire marshal in getting that order brought? I don't know. I believe that the office of the ombudsman for the city is actually looking into that question. But that was what was used, was an order from the provincial office of the fire marshal. And at the end, at that final stage, there was no legal battle because we were given less than 48 hours notice. In fact, realistically, we were given less than 24 hours notice. So we could not find a lawyer in time. so there wasn't a legal battle. We are, as I say, we took it to the ombudsman after the fact, and we'll see what they come back with. We're still in conversation with them. But that was it.
A final question online. How can we briefly, gently relay your eloquent message about seeing each other's humanity if we see a person treating someone with disrespect that might be grounded in fear?
I have no idea how to answer that. I mean, there's so many different ways that scenario could play out, and you can't give one abstract answer. I mean, I think one of the principles that is suggested in bystander intervention quite often is don't engage with the person who's being abusive, engage with the person who's being abused. Talk to the person who's being abused, say, you know, are you okay? Anything I can do? You want me to walk you over there? Don't in the immediate situation engage with the abuser, because you are likely to escalate the situation and make it worse. On the other hand, if you have some drive-by thing, like we just had a guy walk by the encampment and yell slurs at trans people, and he's just doing this drive-by slur, I will just yell at him as he walks past, you know. But I suspect this person has a real specific scenario in mind, but without knowing what that scenario is, it's really hard to know what advice to give.
And there are so many different ways that bystanders can intervene. All right, I'm going to look out into the audience. We have 3 questions here. I'm going to go here, here, and there.
Especially last fall with that tragedy, but your whole journey, how have you felt? I assume there has been good support from around the city. How has that been? What has that been like?
So this, for the benefit of people online who can't hear this, a brief summary is you've been curious about what the wider Toronto context of support has been like for Maggie's work.
Yeah, I think we have had a lot of support. We've had a lot of opposition too, but a lot of support. The Anglican Diocese of Toronto has been, somewhat to my surprise, absolutely supportive. I didn't necessarily expect that. When the encampment first started to grow substantially in the yard, I was kind of concealing this from the bishop, because I was worried about how they were going to react. But in fact, they have been absolutely supportive, including at one point paying our legal fees. And, you know, many of the community organizations in the neighborhood have been very supportive. There has been opposition which is getting more and more organized, and even now that the encampment is gone, they are continuing to get more organized, and they're now going after the safe consumption site. That's their next target. But yeah, we have had a lot of support, and it's been very, very helpful. Obviously, you know, sometimes you can feel very isolated, and knowing that there are networks of support around the city has been very helpful.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your book. I live in the downtown east side, and it spoke to me. The question that I have is, I wonder what the unhoused people at the encampment
What do the people at the encampment think about the book?
This has been the best thing about the book for me, is that the people in the encampment really have embraced it. And that's been hugely important to me. I mean, I was talking to them the whole time I was writing it. I was talking to people about it and what, you know, what they wanted to see in it and how they wanted themselves presented in it or didn't want themselves presented in it. So it's not just my book. It belongs to the whole community. But I was still worried, you know, once it's actually finished and out, how are people going to react? But people, like, you know, I gave away copies and everybody was like, oh God, we need more copies. I got to give this to everybody I know. You know, when I won the Toronto Book Award, a bunch of people from the encampment came to the award ceremony with me and came up on stage with me to accept the award, because it's not just my book, it's their book, it's their lives. And yeah, they're just, you know, they're great people, and it makes me really, really happy that, and you know, I mean, even when it first came out and people would be like, oh my God, I'm in a book. I'm actually in a book. That's really been good.
I want to know exactly what you yelled at the guy who yelled at the train.
What did you yell at the guy who was driving by?
Exactly. Let me try to remember exactly what. I think don't say that sort of shit around here.
I loved your book, so I just want to offer gratitude for it and to say I would be interested to hear how the weekly practice of writing a sermon influenced the process of writing this prose book.
How does the weekly practice of writing a sermon inform the practice of writing this book?
Probably not very much, because they're quite different genres, although I incorporated a couple of sermons into the book, but they exist for different reasons and come to be in different ways. I mean, I find the sermon form very interesting, because what it's about is you get some random texts thrown at you. You don't get to choose them. You get some random texts thrown at you, and sometimes they're really weird. And you need to take these texts which you didn't choose and make them speak into your own community and your own setting in a really specific and localized sort of way. You can't just sort of vaguely preach into the wind. You're preaching to people. You're preaching to a specific group of people. And so it is quite a fascinating genre that way, and there's not anything quite like it. I actually do have a collection of homilies that's coming out in June. It took me a while to convince Alana at Coach House that that was a good idea, but you know, but it's gonna be more niche than experimental poetry, but it is as a genre exercise, I find very interesting.
We have one question over here.
Hi, thank you for coming and for the talk today. I was curious whether the church where you're currently serving, does that church have a history of social justice? And then how did you bring the church along with you on this journey?
Does St. Stephen's in the Fields have a history of social justice? And did you bring people how did you bring people along with you?
Absolutely. St. Stephen's has a huge history of social justice. It is deep, deep, deep in the character of the parish. Long before I came there, that was why I wanted to be there. There is a letter in the archives from Doctors Hospital that was sent, and Doctors Hospital was closed in 1995, so it was sometime before that, sent to the priest of the church at the time saying, there are too many homeless people hanging around the church. Doctors Hospital's right across the street, was right across the street, and the priest wrote back basically, what kind of hospital even are you? So it's very deep in the parish character. I mean, really, there's a somebody online from like 1895 talking about going to St. Stephen's, and he's like, there's not a lot of rich people there. It's pretty much mostly poor people. And he quotes from the sermon, which is a social justice sermon. So it's been part for a long time. So I didn't really have to bring people along with me because they were right there. It's a really unusual parish that way, and I'm really, really lucky to be there. And, you know, the encampment, there was never any doubt. It's like, we've got all these people camping in our yard. What do? Well, we feed them. We get to know them. We find out what they need. We advocate for them. We protect them. Of course we do, because that's what we do.
We have time for one more question here.
While you're here, will you be able to have time to visit what I'm going to call the 15-block long Hastings Street encampment and any of the people who worked with them? I lived in downtown Eastside for years and years, then moved to Kingston, Ontario, and we're back, and it's grown. And so there are a great number of people working with them, but if you'll be able to go there.
Are you visiting the downtown east side while you're here in Vancouver?
Unfortunately, not on this trip. I thought that I might, and then I've ended up with an engagement in Victoria tomorrow afternoon, and also the evening after as well. So I'll be in Victoria more than I will be in Vancouver on this trip. I am going to be visiting Pandora, and the OPS there for sure. So I'll be able to spend some time with the Victoria community, but less the Vancouver community, unfortunately, on this trip.
Well, Maggie, we're so honored that you... So everyone, we have a wonderful person here selling books from Upstart and Crow, and Maggie's going to be at the signing table here to sign books and chat with folks afterwards. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening.